All right, number 3 on this list. This is a big one. We've talked about this. Projection. Some thoughts or feelings you have about another person may make you uncomfortable. If you project those feelings, you're misattributing them to the other person. For example, you may dislike your new coworker, but instead of accepting that, you choose to tell yourself that they dislike you. You see in their actions the things you wish you could do or say, or just things that you're not actually dealing with. Okay? And we talked about this one a lot.
See that one a lot, yeah.
Yeah, we do see it quite a bit. And the idea of projecting your insecurities onto somebody else. I think I mentioned it last week with that quote, which I misquoted by Emerson and Thoreau back when I used to study them a lot in high school with transcendentalism and stuff like that. But it's, you can't love or hate something about anybody else unless you love or hate that about yourself, you know. And that really shows a lot of what it is. And when we're in those lower brain, our emotional brain, purely living in our emotional brain, these self-defense mechanisms also just start shutting off or turning on at rapid fire, and we start projecting without even knowing it, right? So instead of dealing with your insecurities and the problems that you may have, your stresses and stuff like that, instead of repressing them, people may project them out, or they're just repressed for so long that it automatically does it. This is why I've got a huge problem when people point fingers, you know, when they point blame to other people. You just do this, you just do that, you just do this. It's like you're so angry about it, pointing at other people, and it's like that's one reason why I'm so vigilant with where I'm at. Where's my standing on it? Because if I'm so harshly reacting to something in that manner, that's a huge red flag to go, maybe it's not them, maybe that is me.
I think that realization, though, with projection, it really hits you when you become aware of it, because you're like, oh,
yeah,
I'm doing that, you know, and it's something you have to deal with yourself. I think dealing with yourself is harder than having to deal with somebody else, like having somebody else put the blame on, you know.
I think I talked about that in one of the videos from last week, using people as emotional dumpsters, right? That's, again, essentially, the nature of karma, sending that type of energy out and dumping that on there. That's it. That is a form of projection. You know, so a lot of this stuff ties into all those other things that I was talking about last week. You know, and it does, a lot of these things do fall in line with the types of topics that I like to discuss. Yeah, projection. Oof, it is a doozy. Because the biggest thing about a lot of these coping mechanisms, these defense mechanisms that are built in they are automatic. They're built into your subconscious, and you unconsciously do it like that. It streamlines. So being hyper aware, being vigilant about your own thoughts, where you're at, knowing yourself, right, and then being able to recognize your own patterns of who you are, why you are, and then, like you said, being aware when you notice it within yourself. It's like, oh, hey, yeah, that's that's what that is. Now I can identify it. I can put a label on it. I can now be aware when I do it, and then hopefully shorten that time for letting it control my thoughts and my actions for too long. Because there are people that hold on to stuff for so long, they're projecting out on other people for years, or even most of their lives. You know, and that's I almost said the C word. I was gonna say that's crazy. I was gonna say that's crazy to me, but it's just like, it's so unfathomable just for me to think about that. Not necessarily crazy, you know, connotative, not actual crazy. It's like, just to be clear, it's more unfathomable. And then it's like unfathomable to me.
Well, I think it's interesting because when you're dealing with that stuff and you become aware of it and you start to see it in other people, then you can take that and be like, it's not me, and not hold that blame or that whatever that person is trying to push on you, not hold it within you and create all these negative thoughts within yourself, but just recognizing that it's them trying to project their feelings onto you and be like, I mean, your responses to them, what would your response to be to them? Just,
It's hard.
Because they're just going to want to say what they want to say, but ultimately when it's up to you to decide how you take how they approach you with stuff, with their projection, with their negativity.
Yeah. Right? And you're right. It's actually really hard to talk to people that project. Like, how are you going to convince somebody else to break down that wall of projection when they're blaming you for doing those things? And if you don't know yourself, or you don't have like the track record to back it up, by knowing yourself, how do you fight that? Like, how would you approach that if someone does that to you? Like, how would you I'm trying to think of an example.
I guess like it would be like, who would be approaching me? Because somebody you know versus somebody you don't know, it's different.
It's vastly different. You're right.
Because I become very sarcastic if it's somebody that I know.
Yeah, and I get that. I can see that, because I've been on the end of that, but you've also been on the end of mine. So it's like, it's a give and take. It's part of it. But we do accept those parts of ourselves.
Well, even in passing with other people, I think it's more of a passive thing when people start doing that. Instead of focusing on what they're projecting onto me, I try to focus more on myself, on like, how am I reacting to this? How am I taking them talking to me this way, right? Am I going to let their words affect me? Because ultimately, they have to deal with their own stuff.
Thank you.
And I don't. That's their thing to deal with. And I'm not going to let that affect the rest of my day. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I agree. That's exactly how I dealt for a long time. It's like, just let it. It's not mine. Let them have their negativity, or I'll put a stop to it. Like, and I remember there's people that I've met. I was traveling the country. Like, they come at me. I remember one of my friends now. She used to work at Applebee's, and I went in, and it was after we went in kind of late. It was me and a buddy, and I literally was just asking about, okay, how long is the wait going to be, because our dinner break had to have a certain time limit, because we had to catch the bus, which was the company bus, to go back to the train where we were staying. And she took it as like, hey, yeah, I'm just doing my job here. Sort of deal. And I was like, oh, hold on. But she's so used to that, and she was kind of projecting her frustrations onto me because she was having a stressful night. And I was like, I didn't mean that as a way to just upset you. I'm just asking because we have a limited amount of time. I just want to know if the wait is going to be appropriate for us, or do we have to go to somewhere else? And then it was great, because she immediately was like, again, when you recognize that, she was like, oh, okay, cool. I sorry for that. She completely apologized. She's great customer service. So then she's just like, yeah. Just, I'm sorry. It's gonna be this long. It's like, great. We have time. So we ended up having my buddy and I. We ended up eating over there and having a couple drinks before we got the bus. But yeah, you're right. When somebody's brought to it, it does depend on how you approach it, even if it's somebody you don't even know. Right. And then being passive about it, again, that's dealing with yourself. I do agree with that a lot, because a lot of times, again, you don't know what you might be projecting out in response to it. Like, you might be unaware of where you got to that. Maybe it was something that you did personally, and it's like, I didn't mean to do it that way. I didn't mean to approach it in that manner.
Well, that's like you just in that story talking about the whole Applebee's thing.
Mm-hmm.
The way she took it, you can't control the way she takes it, but
Correct.
You can clear up the information that was given. Like, hey, I was just trying to, giving that backstory.
Absolutely. And then the other side of that is like diffusing it. Right, that's kind of like what I was trying to go at. Like, you're trying to focus inwardly for that. Like, am I overreacting? Maybe it was me that was doing it. If I react negatively to it, and I think that's the other side to that. Instead of just looking inward, and it's something I've talked about before, is just listening twice as much to try to understand. Listening to understand versus listening to reply. Right, being able to understand somebody's struggle, and I was, at least back then in that situation, I was able to pick that up. Like, oh, she's struggling. She's stressing out. She thought I was just some irate customer who like, oh, I still wear my watch inside. That's why I'm like, not like this. I'm not taking my pulse. It's like, time. Hey, miss, we've been waiting. We just got here, but we're waiting. Which she might have been accustomed to, and that's customer service. I get it. I totally understand it. So I didn't necessarily need to look inward at that moment, and instead try to look at her from her perspective. And that's actually a principle of Aikido. Aikido is thought to be the most how do they put it? Not optimistic, most moral martial art, because one of the main principles in metaphorically and physically is you look from your opponent's perspective. So a lot of their techniques you will actually face in the same direction as they do, but it's also meant to, because of the do, right, at the end, Aikido, which is meant more of that development, that more spiritual side to it, and the intellectual side to it, to actually see from their perspective. And when you see from their perspective, and you literally face a perspective, the only person who is fighting in that scenario is your opponent, is somebody else. So that's just a different way, I think, to deal with that sort of projection out, because that's essentially what it is. And a lot of times those angry, upset people that are raging, they might be projecting or moving into this other thing out here, doing something else to throw those feelings at you when it might be something that they're dealing with internally.
Well, what about even responding with kindness,
Yeah.
Instead of trying to clear, just being kind, despite the fact that them coming at you either aggressively or projecting onto you, however they do it, just instead of being passive or seeing where they come from, what about just reacting in kindness, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, when I've dealt with a customer before, and she's got, she's got all the COVID stuff to worry about with her mask, and she's got 2 kids with her, and she's just waiting and waiting and waiting, and she's upset, and she's talking about all these bad things that are happening to her. The best thing you could do, the best that I felt that I could do when I was working, was that I could approach her with, hey, how can, I got this for you. I know she didn't ask for it, I got her some water, and I got her some stuff for her kids to be entertained with, and despite her giving me an attitude to begin with, the beginning of that interaction, it really changed how she saw me, how she was first projecting onto me, all that anger, all that frustration of having to deal with the stresses of dealing with her kids and dealing with COVID compliance and stuff like that, right?
Yeah, and I think that's a great example for that. And again, that's something else that we've talked about too, like responding in kindness, and that may not always be an option, because people have still lashed out even through that, because they'll take it as like an act of, oh, you're undermining my feelings, even though that may not be the case. Again, that is a projection of their insecurity of, you're undermining my feelings, you're not listening to me, you just want to diffuse it because you don't care. And again, that may not be the case. So like you're mentioning, it does really depend on who it is, how they approached it, what the situation involves, and sometimes it comes out as like sarcasm, which again, I'm a huge fan of sarcasm, just
sometimes
a little bit, but I'm okay with that, because I know myself. I think it's healthier to laugh more than sit in anger, and I think I mentioned that too, like how much your darkness is versus how much your light, because even if you're just having a good time, doesn't mean you have to take it seriously if you're making jokes and whatnot, but as long as everybody's having fun, then great, Hey, thanks for checking out my video on here. If you like the content that I'm putting out, please be sure to like and subscribe down below, and add a comment, because I'd love to see what your guys' thoughts are on this sort of content and these topics that I'm putting out there. Alright, until next time, stay golden.